So without further ado, it's great to have Erica with us, and Erica has 10 years experience of working in primary school teaching, and she has she specialises in early years, together with a demonstrated 10-year history of working in education management industry as deputy head, leading the curriculum studies, continuous professional development, school development planning and quality assurance. Erica is currently a PhD student in the Department of Psychology and Human Development at the UCL Institute of Education under supervision of Professor Andy Tolmie and Dr. Matt Somerville. And it's great to have Andy with us on the call as well. So Erica's doctoral research focuses on the implementation of emotion regulation strategies through co-regulation within the early years. And I understand that she's going to be employed as a part-time lecturer and examiner for student teachers within the University of Malta from this academic year. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us, Erica, and I know you have a guest with you as well, and I will allow you to introduce her whenever the time is right. So thank you, and a very warm welcome to you from Scotland.
Thank you very much. I'll start my presentation and then introduce Marta as our guest speaker later on. Okay, I'm going to be sharing my screen. Okay, so. Do I have to change my display settings?
That's it. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so as Beverly mentioned, my research study is focused on regulating emotions in the Maltese classroom to improve the quality of teaching and learning in the early years. Now, my research aim within my study is to implement emotion regulation strategies within early childhood sector, which would promote better effective learning, leading to improved academic performance and safeguard against mental or adjustment problems later on in life. Now, research shows that in educational settings, preschool children with low emotion regulations have more conflict with their teachers. Poor emotion regulation has detrimental effects on school performance and social relationships. So it may result in internalizing and externalizing disorders, and these contribute to societal problems. The internalizing disorders can affect the way a person thinks or feels, such as depression or anxiety disorders, and externalizing disorders can be observed directly, often caused by a lack of control, such as conduct disorder or anger management issues. Now, integrating knowledge about ER strategies within the education system, in my opinion, is crucial to enable a decrease in educational problems, such as absenteeism, poor school performance, early school leavers, poor interpersonal skills, and deficits in higher order cognitive processes. Now, these are signs of a child having difficulty with emotion regulation. Poor emotion regulation can manifest in irritable temperaments, disruptive and oppositional defiant behaviors, emotional reactions, making physical or verbal threats, or exhibiting erratic or explosive behaviors. Now, this is a definition of emotion regulation. It sums the term up pretty well. Emotion regulation is the processes by which individuals influence which emotions they have, when they have them, and how they experience and express these emotions. Now, as we know, emotion regulation leads to appropriate behavior, and I will talk you through to this image. So we have the stimulus, that is what triggers the emotion. Then the emotion comes about, filters through the brain, and interprets the emotion using the prefrontal cortex to eventually result in behavior. Now, at a very young age, as we know, the prefrontal cortex would not have fully matured, and neither would their reasoning skills be fully formed too. So this is where the teacher or the caregiver's role is of great importance, especially in early childhood. Now, the teacher within the classroom, using these emotion regulation strategies, would help the child interpret that emotion felt in a positive way to then eventually lead to this appropriate behavior, this proper behavior, and would result in the child being able to focus on the task at hand within the classroom. But if a child is too worried or too preoccupied with negative thoughts to pay attention in the classroom, whilst, for example, taking a maths test, the child's academic performance will most likely suffer. So it is very important that the child is able to properly cope with emotions that will allow him or her to experience an inner sense of calm. Now, emotion regulation, according to research, is considered to be one of the most far-ranging and influential processes at the interface of cognition and emotion. And this is due to the fact that emotion regulation is a component of mental health, which encompasses a person's ability to be productive, have a sound interpersonal life, and make positive social relationships. It also helps in being able to handle the everyday stresses that children are faced with. And many children nowadays, unfortunately, are not able to handle a small problem that they come across. Either they tend to cry, get into a tantrum, or turn violent in order to solve the problem. So emotion regulation would teach them how to tackle the everyday stresses on a daily basis. Now I will talk you through to the model of emotion regulation, which is based on Gross's model. So up here, you can see the 5 emotion regulation strategies, which I will explain in more detail shortly. And here explains how we attend to a situation that crops up. So here we have the situation that crops up, we attend to it, we appraise it, and then we respond to it through our behavior, which takes us back to the situation, to attend to it if need be. Now, we have the first 4 emotion regulation strategies, which are called the antecedent focused strategies, which means they occur before an emotional response is fully generated. Then we have response modulation, better known as suppression, which is a response-focused strategy, which is a strategy that is adopted after the emotion is felt and the behavior is impacted. Now, the first most forward-looking antecedent strategy is situation selection, in which a person chooses to enter into or avoid a situation. However, since the boundaries of situation selection are not always clear, and not always an easy task for children to choose at such a young age, since they might find difficulty in predicting their emotional responses to future events, or making suitable decisions about the situations they're in, I decided to not include situation selection within my research study, but focus on the last 4. From situation modification to response modulation. So I will be going through each situation, each emotion regulation in more detail, and giving an example or 2 of each. Although response modulation is negatively correlated to social competence and academic engagement in the classroom, and also negatively affecting the working memory, I included it for a particular reason, and I will explain this in a few minutes. So now we'll delve deeper into each emotion regulation strategy and give an example of each. So our first emotion regulation strategy is situation modification, which involves adjusting or modifying a situation to change its emotional impact. Now, an example of this is a group of students are having difficulty working in a group. One child gets particularly angry. the teacher intervenes and defines the roles for each child. Another example of this is a child has left his homework at home and gets into panic mode. The teacher says that the child can bring the homework to school the next day. So those were two practical examples of situation modification. Our next antecedent-focused strategy is attention deployment via distraction, which involves redirecting attention away from a situation. An example of this is a child is getting frustrated with covering some written work in class. The teacher asks him to take a letter to the school secretary's office. A second example, a child lost his tooth in class and is visibly upset and scared. The teacher then explains the story of the tooth fairy. The teacher wraps his tooth in an envelope and addresses it to the tooth fairy. So these are two actual examples that I've observed during my observations in class. Next antecedent strategy is cognitive change, which is a problem-solving strategy because it involves the ability to change how a person looks at a situation or meaning they put behind a situation. An example of this is a child has difficulty conforming to class rules. The teacher then explains in depth that the rules would be beneficial for him to abide by and exist for their own safety. Another example of cognitive change is a child is disappointed with his results in his spelling test. The teacher explains that we learn from our mistakes and that he should study harder next time. Now, our last emotion regulation strategy is suppression, which involves the efforts to modify an emotion after it has been fully generated. An example of this, a group of boys lost a football match against their opponents. A teacher tells the boys to forget about it and to move on. And our second example, a child accidentally breaks her friend's ruler. Both girls start to argue and cry. The teacher tells them to stop making a fuss. So this is a strategy that during training I did not encourage the teachers to adopt at all. In fact, it resulted in the teachers avoiding the strategy altogether because it made them aware that suppression is not the way to regulate children's emotions, and that the antecedent focus strategies are better. So making them aware of this strategy helps them adopt the antecedent strategies in class, as I said, which are distraction, situation modification, and cognitive change. Now I will talk you through the development of emotion regulation. Now, sorry about that. Okay. So, children are not born with emotion regulation capabilities. Children learn these ER skills through a nurturing relationship with a caring teacher or caregivers within a structured and supportive context in order to learn and practice these new skills. During early childhood education, the children at such a young age would need the constant repetition, drilling and practice, as we all know, with many other things as well, so that these ER strategies are internalized and they result in self-regulation. And self-regulation is when the child regulates his or her emotions on her own or his own by adopting these ER strategies. The implementation of the ER strategies are based on Vygotsky's cognitive scaffolding, in which the expert, in this case, the teacher or the more regulated peer, supports the novice or the less regulated child and builds on the already acquired or skill level, acquired knowledge or skill level just above where the child currently is, until the child is able to self-regulate. So in this perspective, the concept of these interactive supportive processes have been built on Vygotsky's notion of the zone of proximal development. So, just put this. What is co-regulation? Co-regulation is the relationship the caregiver builds in order to support and scaffold the children's participation in everyday activities by modifying the children's emotions, thoughts, and behavior within that current situation. As we mentioned, co-regulatory interactions assume an expert and a novice role, and in this case, the expert would be either the teacher or a more regulated peer, and the novice role would be the less regulated peer, child, as mentioned before. Co-regulation by a supportive caregiver will promote self-efficacy and allow children, youth, and young adults to feel secure enough to practice these new skills and learn from their mistakes. So now we come to self-regulation, as mentioned before. Emotional self-regulation is the control or influence one has over their emotions. It is the monitoring and the managing one's emotions to bring about positive results such as well-being and learning. For example, if you've ever talked yourself out of a bad mood or calmed yourself down when you are angry, you are displaying effective emotional self-regulation. Best is children learn how to self-regulate through co-regulation, which is, as I said, either through a teacher, always through an expert, through the teacher or a more regulated peer, so that these children will be shown the best strategies that would lead to greater academic and social success. And this is why early caregiving is a fundamental component in children's emotion developing capacities for self-regulation. However, how much is co-regulation needed? Now, capacity for self-regulation, as we know through our experience at school, develops over time from infancy through young adulthood and sometimes even beyond. Now, the amount of co-regulation a child needs will vary as they grow, as we can see through this graph, which presents a theoretical model of the balance of a young person's capacity for self-regulation and a need for adult support. And as we can see through the graph, as a child's ability to self-regulate increases, less caregiver co-regulation is required. So naturally, there are individual differences in self-regulation capacity and the need for co-regulation support. And these differences are based on internal factors such as biology, temperament, or skill development, and sometimes result from environmental factors, which include experiences of stress and adversity. Now, as mentioned before, co-regulation is self-regulation is best implemented through co-regulation. As I was researching, I came across this quote, which I wanted to share with you because it sums co and self-regulation quite nicely. If the cycle of co-regulation between infant and caregiver happens consistently, predictably, and securely, the child's brain can then learn to self-regulate. If not, they will struggle to self-regulate their emotions and behavior as they grow older. Now, I've gathered my findings, both from my classroom observations and also from my interviews conducted with the classroom teacher participants. I'll be reading them, talking you through each one. The first slide here is our findings gathered from my classroom observations throughout the intervention program. So teachers changed their mindset in ER. They recognized that the emotive aspects of cognition are the focus of schooling. And they were also more aware of the benefits of the ER strategies, which in turn strengthened the implementation of the strategies. And not only did it have an impact on the children themselves, but it also had an impact on the professional, on the teachers themselves as well. And I noted throughout the research study how important it is to train early childhood educators in emotion regulation strategies to be able to pass on to these young children. Awareness of implementing the antecedent focus strategies over the response focus strategies. So teachers were more aware of implementing the first three emotion regulation strategies over suppression. Situation modification and cognitive reappraisal were the two most popular strategies when collecting data both from my pilot study and also from my main study. Now, at the beginning of the scholastic year, distraction was used by the teachers until students settled. And it was also used along the intervention program when time was limited, or alongside cognitive reappraisal, or used as a quick fix strategy, perceived as a quick fix strategy when adopted on its own. A two-stage adoption of strategies was implemented too. So not only did I observe teachers implementing one strategy within one situation with one child, but also there were some teachers who implemented two strategies at a go, one after the other, with one particular student within one situation. For example, I observed situation modification alongside cognitive reappraisal, or distraction with cognitive reappraisal, or distraction with situation modification. Now, this is interesting. The choice of strategy depended on the type of situation and child characteristics. It was very interesting to observe throughout the intervention program. So a teacher would use one type of strategy with one student within a particular situation, but use a different strategy with another student, even though it was a similar situation. And some strategies worked better with some students and other strategies worked better with other students. For example, teachers would not use cognitive reappraisal with a child who gets into tantrums or panic attacks, but would use distraction first to calm the child down, and then use cognitive reappraisal to reason out once the child was calm. However, the same teacher would use cognitive reappraisal immediately with another child who is not as anxious or not anxious at all. So depending on the type of situation and child characteristics, the teacher would choose the best ER strategy. Co-regulation enhanced the teacher-student and student-student relationship when facing an emotionally challenging situation, and it also created a warm, sensitive and supportive atmosphere in the classroom. ER strategies facilitated the children to focus on their task at hand when facing an emotionally challenging situation. And this resulted, I noticed along the intervention program, an improved classroom management, effective learning and academic improvement. Now, as we mentioned, adopting the same ER strategy when the same particular situations recurred with the same children, better known as cognitive scaffolding, reinforced internalization at a faster pace. So when the teacher used the same strategy with the same child in the same situation along the intervention program, internalization of these ER strategies happened at a faster pace. So the children arrived to self-regulation faster. Co-regulation was noted amongst the children themselves. It was put a smile on my face, actually observing the children, these little ones, imitating the children's the teacher's mannerisms, and also adopting the same language that the teacher would have used within that same situation in the classroom. And also self-regulation was apparent with certain children towards the end of my intervention program. Now, these are the findings gathered from my interviews with the participants, and teachers felt that helping children to self-regulate would help disruptive emotions in check and think before they act, help maintain the proper mindset during challenging situations, leads the children to healthy mental and physical behavior, and help them to handle life's obstacles and make most of the situation, which in my opinion I feel are 21st century skills and that all children should be taught throughout their education. This way children will be able to learn how to face their everyday stresses, and also when they're older learn how to face their bigger problems they come across in life, and definitely would become more resilient from a very young age. And this is how we want our younger generations to be resilient and more emotionally regulated. I'm going to conclude with my favorite quote, which is, when we work on a child's self-regulation, we are creating that stable internal platform that makes growth possible, any and all kinds of growth. So I stop there. I thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing right now. Oops, sorry. So that's one. Okay. Okay, so now on to Martez, our next guest speaker, who has 35 years of teaching experience in the early years. She's an excellent teacher who always researches for new scientific-based pedagogies to implement in class. She was also one of the class teacher participants in the main data collection of my doctoral research study. And here she is to share her experience with you on a very practical side now. On to you, Martez.
Thank you, Ms. Erica, and hello, everybody. What I am going to share with you is not as technical as Ms. Erica's view. Obviously, she's doing the study. Mine is a bit more of on a practical level, okay, with our little boys and girls. But through this study, even I managed to learn quite a bit from the children. When I was first approached to take part in the study, I questioned myself. I said, it's interesting, true, but I was a bit skeptical. How could a young child recognize his emotion and not only recognize, but learn eventually to regulate it? But always being interested to know, especially now, even at the end of my career, new ways that help us in this constant evolving world of education, I decided to give it a go with Miss Erica, knowing that Miss Erica is always quite thorough in her work and she would make it as interesting and informative as possible. During the first few weeks, I became aware of my own emotions and my own reactions before introducing the regulation to the children. I realized that I myself was controlling my emotions using strategies like deep breathing when the atmosphere in the classroom got a bit too much, counting to 10 at times before reacting to any negative comment in the classroom. And so, through that, I tried to be more aware of my emotional cues because I had to present my children with a calm reaction in certain situations, which would mirror what they would themselves be doing. I started my classroom approach by gradually making the children aware of their own feelings, using classroom situations to elicit different feelings. I realized that it was easier for some children to recognize emotions in others rather than themselves, especially negative ones, when other children especially used to irritate them. Emotion cards were kept freely available, and the children were encouraged to place them on their desk should they feel that they were not yet ready to discuss their feelings openly in front of their peers. For example, if a child was asked to read aloud in class and that child refused, he could pick an emotion card and say, and put it on his table, and with a feeling of either because he feels embarrassed, because he is shy, and he would place that card on the table, and I would know that he was not ready yet to engage in reading to the class. I had to express, obviously, my feelings in a very calm and positive way. And through our daily activities, the children were encouraged to recognize different emotions in particular situations through our work. For example, characters which we came across in our storybooks. How was the character feeling? Why was the character feeling the way he was? Personal emotion recognition during, for example, a thunderstorm. Okay, when some children were feeling scared, others thought it was funny that some children were feeling scared. Why? And we got a group discussion going how we can have different emotions to the same situation. Birthday celebrations was another occasion where obviously the emotion here was one of happiness, fun. So through our daily activities, outings, and so on, we were encouraged to recognize emotions. Once we got through the stage, we worked in groups. In groups, we couldn't work physically in groups, but we had, I've encouraged groups, for instance, of children who were feeling the same emotion. Let's say, taking again the example of the thunderstorm, we had the ones that were scared of the thunderstorm, the ones that were thinking it's fun to have a thunderstorm. Others thought that it was funny that other children were scared of a thunderstorm, and they discussed their feelings why. And this helped all the groups to see different perspectives of the feelings. Initially, as Erica said before, I refer to her Miss Erica because obviously we were in the same school for a number of years. Initially, situation modification was the most common strategy. Adapting the situation to diffuse the emotion, helping it not to escalate further. And some examples of this in the classroom, we had a particular child where this child was a very organized and precise child. However, there were times, quite frequently, when he came into class later than the rest, and the lesson could have started. The child initially used to throw a tantrum and not want to come into the class. It used to disturb the whole class because the other children obviously couldn't continue working. So the issue was that he wouldn't be doing the same thing that the rest of the class were doing. So what happened was that I started gradually telling him that it doesn't matter if he came in late. The homework which was collected earlier could be given later. He just needed the book which the children were working on at that point in time taken out of his bag. And obviously we move on from there, because like that, he would be doing the same thing as the rest of the class. And gradually, the tantrums got less, and we got to the point where the child, whenever he was late, used to come into the class, put his bag down, check the book, ask which book we are using, take it out, and continue throughout the lesson without any disturbance at all. One instance which I was struck by, where the child actually regulated himself, was a case when we had a child sitting next to another boy who was very fidgety. He kept falling off his chair, throwing rubbers around, and the child who was close by came up to me and asked very politely to change, to have his place, his seating changed. And I asked, but why do you want to change your place? And he said, because the child next to me is distracting me, and I don't want to get into an argument with him because he's my friend. So if you change my place, that is going to solve the situation, because I won't get distracted and he can keep on going on with whatever was going on. So that was something which I had really admired in this little boy. And we were talking about 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds here. With practice, emotion regulation became more present in our daily routine. And it is a question of practice for the kids and the atmosphere, the empathy in the classroom. Children would discuss their feelings. They started feeling more less embarrassed, ready to share, and they discuss their feelings freely, okay, about at times even incidents that did not occur in the classroom. If an accident happened on the way to school, if a family member was unwell, especially during COVID times, we had a number of family members who were unwell, and children obviously got very perplexed. What's happening? What's going on? And I used to encourage them to share their experiences, not only when the person was unwell, but even when the person started getting better. It was at this stage that I attempted to introduce cognitive change with a very, very few children in the class who could, at this point, I taught, work on cognitive change. A particular instance was of a little girl who refused to eat her lunch because her mother had given her food, which was not her favorite pasta. This girl liked pasta, special type of pasta with pesto. On this occasion, this child did not have that, and she simply refused to eat anything else. Even if we offered her a sandwich, nothing else. And then I got to explaining to her that her mother, the parent, the caregiver, had given so much time, so much of her time to prepare that lunch with the intention that it might be a bit different than usual. And she was lucky to have lunch, because there are children who cannot even choose what type of lunch they have because they have no food. So gradually, while listening, she began to poke at her food. And gradually she started eating more of it. And when it was time to go outside to play, I praised her for making the effort, for at least eating quite a bit of it, if not all. And her reply was that she wanted her mummy to be pleased that she ate it, even though it was not the usual lunch that she was given. During the COVID year, the children encountered a number of different emotions, which were reflected in their class behavior and even in their performance. Feelings of anxiety were ever present. Separation from extended family, like grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles. A totally different class routine with social distancing and much more. Masks on these little children had to be kept on, and it wasn't an easy start to the year. I used rather a number of storytelling exercises together with information why did we have to go about this in this way. The situation was a modified one of blended learning. So we had the class together with children who were learning online. Initially, the stories were used to help the children become aware and deal with their feelings of anxiety about the outbreak. What was the outbreak? What was happening? Why was it happening? How could we prevent it from our part? There were a number of things we could do and remind each other, not only do, but remind each other, okay, to help us have a more relaxed time in the classroom. even for the children who are at home, who are following the online program, stories were used. For example, stories like Why We Stay at Home. And they were read and they were explored with the intervention of the children who were present in class, so that both sets of children could empathize with the feelings of the ones who were at home, okay, who couldn't socially mingle with the rest of the class, and the ones who were at school, who maybe felt that they weren't as safe as the ones who were at home. Trying to keep everyone motivated was no mean feat, especially when school closure was once again imminent. Children were anxious again. Some showed more intense emotions like crying upon coming to class. They had to fall back into a routine. They had to feel safe. They had to be encouraged to transition calmly, both from home to school and from one activity to another, because when they were moving around from one lesson to another for extracurricular activities, they realized that they weren't in the safety of their own bubble in the classroom. So at first, this caused a bit of anxiety as well. Pupils were constantly guided and reassured, and as much as possible beforehand, they were told how to navigate any potentially challenging situation or anything that was going to happen during the day, which was not within the norm of the program. This helped them to calm themselves more easily and be more in control. Frequent brain breaks were given in the classroom, as the movement helped them to relax. It gave them a break from the routine, and it helped them unwind, and they then sustained further longer periods of attention. A particular child was one of the children with which I used cognitive change. This child was having difficulty focusing in class. He was also quite an argumentative child on the playground, and his parents were going through a separation. So he needed the reassurance, but at the same time, he couldn't be treated like a little boy. He didn't want to be treated like a little boy because obviously the confrontational issues at home were affecting him. He was also being challenged by the fact that he was about to have a new sibling. So at first, just trying to encourage him to organize himself more and to be more friendly with others wasn't having much effect. So I went further and I tried to challenge him by telling him that having a younger brother now, very soon, that would mean that he would have the big brother role, that he had to set an example for his younger brother. And this is something which he took on quite well. He started improving in his work, in his presentation of work, and he even started finishing his work on time. He was always ready for class correction, and he was allowed to choose a sticker in return. We came to the point when he didn't even want the sticker because he said, I am pleased because my work is now very neat and tidy. And that is the way we moved forward. Regarding playground, we did have a number of tiffs because, in inverted commas, he was quite a bit of a bossy little boy. And the other children obviously didn't lend themselves to the situation. So I tasked him to be my eyes and ears during playground. And without intervening, he wasn't allowed to intervene. He was just allowed to observe, okay? And let me know what he thought were the issues that were happening in the class, on the playground, which needed my attention. This he did. And through this, we got to discuss certain issues which were not directly pinpointed at him, but from which he could acquire a number of skills, a number of coping skills to use when he had a different opinion to his friends. As the school year progressed, the children's coping skills and strategies do tend to improve, but practice is the key. Practice and perseverance, especially with these little ones. Some of them bring along quite a bit of baggage from home as well. So it is good to get to know the child, and the strategies used depend a lot on getting to know the individual child and empathizing with the characteristics of the child. There is no time frame for it to happen when the child starts to self-regulate himself. But there will be instances, and they will be few initially, where you see it happening. And that is the satisfaction of realizing that at least some of the children are applying the skills themselves. With the rest, I kept on working on emotion recognition, of how to deal with the emotion recognition, not only with them, but even if something upset me personally in the classroom. I must say that as I approach my final year of teaching, this learning experience has proved to be a very positive one. And I appreciate having been given the exposure and training to be able to raise awareness of ER skills and coping strategies in the classroom. Thank you very much for listening to my experience. I hope you find it useful, and I hope you do try and implement some things yourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Erica and Marthies, for your inputs. I'm having a look in the chat pane, and I don't see any questions or comments, but sometimes my chat pane doesn't always update. Susan, are you getting anything coming through?
There's not, but I would encourage people to ask any questions that they have. You can put your hand up or pop it in the chat panel. I suppose I found it fascinating, I have to say, and obviously the impact that you had actually seen in the classroom as well. One of the things I was thinking about was, we have a question from Gillian. Can I just bring you in, Gillian?
Sure.
It was just a very quick question. I think it's really interesting what we're talking about, but I'm just wondering if anybody has any sort of tips on where we can go for more information, because there's probably so much information out there. If anybody has any sort of a narrower direction to head us into, so that we're not constant, using the Google and then you're inundated by resources. Would anybody have anything they would recommend?
Well, I could give some sites to some that I've researched, and also a small handbook onto Beverly, and she can pass them onto you.
That would be brilliant. Thank you.
Resources to Beverly.
I think it's one of these things where you think it's really interesting, and then you Google it, and then you think, where do you start? There's so much information.
Yes, there is, in fact. A very interesting topic.
Yes, definitely.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions that they would like to ask. One of the things I was thinking about, I suppose, when I was listening to it, was obviously a large part of it is the perseverance, I guess, and supporting the child to self-regulate. And how does that transfer at home? And I'm just thinking particularly for those, you had that kind of blended model where the kids were learning at home. Was there some guidance for the parents to reinforce some of the training that the kids were getting
No, with regards to the parents, in fact, that is one of the factors that came out of the interviews from the teachers. In fact, they insisted that not only do all the teachers within the same school get trained on emotion regulation strategies, but also the parents. So the parents work hand in hand with the school, and internalization of these emotion regulation strategies is faster. However, with regards to my intervention program was implemented with those children within the classroom, because I had to observe co-regulation and self-regulation firsthand. However, no, there was no guidance for parents. However, that would be our next step, their next step as a school then, with parents now.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, potentially during COVID and just in life in general, some of the training and the strategies for adults would be very beneficial, given some of the challenges that we have actually gone through. I've just noticed that Shan has popped something into our chat. Shan, do you want to come in and say something?
Yes, thanks, Susan. It's been really fascinating to hear both of your presentations this afternoon. In Scotland, in February 2020, time has changed during COVID, but in February 2020 we published new practice guidance for the early years in Scotland, children's development. So it was really interesting to hear you. I've popped into the comment, we worked very closely with an educational psychologist in Scotland called James McTaggart, and I would encourage colleagues, if you ever get the chance to hear James McTaggart talk, he's a very engaging presenter with a huge wealth of knowledge in this area, and he's a really good person to tap into. I had a question, if we've got time, which I was reflecting on both of your presentations there, and the kind of learning environments that seemed that you were talking to. And one of the things that we've very much been supporting in Scotland in the early years of our primary school is to extend the use of play as pedagogy. And I wondered if that was something that was a feature of Maltese education, and if it was, did you have any experience of supporting co-regulation and self-regulation in children through their play?
Yes, in fact, my sample of children within my intervention program was with kindergarten children, KG2s and year 1s. In Malta, play is, we teach through play up to kindergarten 2. Year 1 locally starts becoming more academic oriented, rather than, there are teachers who continue teaching through play. However, with the vastness of syllabus, it's very difficult to teach through play within the classroom. It's from 5 years, it starts becoming a little bit rigid. However, observing the KG2 classroom participants, yes, they did co-regulate through play. It was constant co-regulating through play, in fact, which was very interesting to note as well. So, yes.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Shan. I was really pleased that you were mentioning some of the work that's going on in Scotland as well, because I think for Gillian that would be a good link as well, potentially. So I'll maybe see if we can get some information to send out with the presentation on that. Has anyone got any final questions before we round off the day? Okay, Beverly, I'll hand over to you just to kind of thank our lovely guests. And end of session?
Yes, thank you everybody for your time this afternoon, and I know there was a question in the chat pane earlier about the presentation, so Erica, if that's all right, I will get a copy of that and I'll send it out to everyone who's been here today. So just finally, once again, thank you so much for your time and sharing this with us, and thank you to Maltese as well for your time. And I'm presuming from your comments that you are maybe in your final year of teaching, maybe heading towards retirement, but if that is the case, then we wish you very well, and
thank you very much.
thank you for sharing your many years of experience with us and with practitioners here in Scotland. So, and thank you to Andrew. I know he's on the call very quietly there, so thank you to Andrew for telling us about Erica and about the work that she's doing and making all of this possible. We do have a session with Andrew on Thursday this week, and if you're interested, please do go to the Education Scotland events page and you'll be able to see our session at 4 o'clock with Andrew. So thank you very much everybody, and hope you have a good evening, and if there's anything else we can help with, please get in contact with us.
Thank you very much, and
thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.